Nangila is a beautiful 8-year-old girl from Nigeria. She loves to sing, she loves to dance, and she has a great future ahead of her. The only problem is that she's dying. Her mother's dead, her father abandoned her, she hasn't had a decent meal in weeks, and malaria is starting to take a great toll on her body. Blessedly, she was found by an international adoption agency. She was able to be taken in by a nice American family and she was able to live happily ever after. Now, this experience may seem like a great triumph over the suffering of poverty and world hunger, yet there's still over a billion people left who are still suffering from this issue. To put in perspective, about 9 million people die each year from hunger and hunger related diseases. That is equivalent of one person dying every 10 seconds. In this speech, I will discuss two arguments that offer ways to reduce world hunger and poverty. I will first discuss Peter Singer's view on how we are morally obligated to help those who are in need. I will then follow up with Nora Neal's view of how the intent of our actions are more important than the results of our actions. Peter Singer argues that we are morally obligated to help those in need, and if we don't help those people in need, we are doing something wrong. And Nora Neal argues that even if we help people who are impoverished, it doesn't justify the correctness of our actions. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Peter Singer's view on reducing world hunger, and you can decide if this is a valid solution to solving the problem. Is it morally wrong to not help those who are in extreme poverty? Peter Singer would argue that yes, that it is wrong. Imagine, if you will, that you're walking through a park and you see a child drowning in a pond. What would you do? You would go help. But let's say if you bought a brand new pair of shoes, by saving the child, you would ruin them. This, of course, would not excuse our duty to save the child. We would, of course, go and help. Let's say there's a group of people standing afar off watching the child, not helping. That is no excuse for us not to help. We would still go help and save the child who's in need. But let's say we're a great distance away and we know we wouldn't be able to make it in time. Well, we would still try. We have a moral obligation to help the child that is drowning. Now, in this world, there are many people who are drowning and dying in world hunger and poverty, and we have a moral obligation to help them. There have been many excuses given of why we shouldn't help, but they are not good excuses. Distance. We've established that even if the child is far away, we would still go help. Well, there are many people in faraway countries that are dying and suffering from poverty and hunger. Material loss, such as losing a brand new pair of shoes. That's not an excuse. We would still save a child's life. Equally, if we sacrifice some of our income and donate it to an aid agency, it could save a person's life that is suffering in poverty and hunger. Now, to those people who are not helping, just because they're not helping doesn't mean we shouldn't help. Now, there are many people around this world who do not donate to aid agencies that could save the child's life. A person who is dying and suffering from poverty and world hunger. Just because they don't donate doesn't make it correct. So we establish we have a moral obligation to help those who are in extreme poverty and extreme hunger. But what is extreme poverty? Extreme poverty is when a person doesn't have enough income to make the basic human needs, such as food, water, shelter, clothing, healthcare, and education. According to the World Bank in 2018, they gave the following statistic. The standard living for a person in extreme poverty is living off $1.90 or less each day. Now let's compare that to an average American who makes $75,000 a year. How much of that money do they use to spend on food? Well, it's only about $2,500 each year. So where does the rest go? It goes towards entertainment. It goes towards vacations. It goes towards technology, things that are not necessary for basic human needs. So now we know what extreme poverty is, and we also know that there are many people who are living very comfortably who are in a position to help. So how far does our moral obligation go to those who are in extreme poverty? Thankfully, Peter Singer offers the following example. Imagine, if you will, a person named Bob. Now, Bob just purchased a Bugatti. He used his entire life savings to put into this Bugatti. Now, not a very smart choice, but he plans on using that, selling it after his retirement, and getting a good return so he can live comfortably. But right now he's enjoying his car and he takes in a little trip. He parks near a set of railroad tracks and decides to take a walk. Now, as he's walking, he sees a child playing on the tracks, and behind that child is a runaway train. He tries to call out to the child, but the child doesn't hear, and there's no way for him to stop the train. This is a very difficult situation for him. But he was able to see a railroad switch, and if he pulls the switch, the train would be diverted and save the child's life. But in doing so, it would crash into a set of barriers and destroy his Bugatti and his whole retirement. So what does Bob decide to do? He decides not to throw the switch. Now, at first, we might accuse Bob, thinking he's a horrible person and that he shouldn't have done that. But let's take a second look at the situation. First, let's take a look at the child. The child is in a position of need. They need help. Now, there are many people around this world who are suffering in hunger and poverty who are in great need of help. Now, let's take a look at Bob. Bob is in a position to help. He can throw the switch. Now, there are many people around this world who are living quite comfortably that are in a position to help. Now, we know a Bugatti is not worth the same amount as a child's life, so we should sacrifice the Bugatti to save the person's life. Equally, people should sacrifice their assets, their life savings, their income, donate that to an aid agency, and they would be able to save a person's life. So Peter Singer concludes that if a person does not donate to an aid agency, they are morally wrong. So we're just like Bob, not throwing the switch, killing the child. So what should we do? Well, Peter Singer recommends the following: that we should cut back on all unnecessary spending and donate that excess money to an aid agency. But how much should we cut back? Well, we should cut back all unnecessary spending to the point that if we cut back any more, we'd be sacrificing to something equivalent to that of a child's life. Now, this may seem a bit extreme, but it is a plausible solution to reducing world hunger and poverty. Now, Honora O'Neill offers a different solution, and you can decide whether results or intent is more important in reducing world hunger and poverty. Is your reasoning for helping people in world poverty as important as the results of your actions? Honora O'Neill would agree that yes, that it is more important to look at the intent of our actions rather than the results. She first takes a look at several controversies with the utilitarian approach towards reducing world hunger and poverty. These are people who are more concerned with the results of their actions. First, we have Peter Singer. Many people fall in this group and agree that we have a moral obligation to help those who are suffering from hunger and poverty. And a lot of other people side with Garrett Hardin, who states that it's better to let these people suffer and die, that in offering them aid, it may help them in the short term, but in the long term, that will only further and greater suffering and death. Now, both of these arguments offer valid factual evidence to support their conclusions. But with this utilitarian approach, it can be seen that they're more concerned with the results of their actions rather than how they come about it. Now, Honora O'Neill noticed that there's an issue with this, so she proposes a different method to reducing world hunger and poverty, and that is the Kantian moral theory. So what is the Kantian moral theory? It's a set of ethics that helps decide whether an action is right or wrong, and that is done by looking at the intent or the nature of an action. Now, each person has a maxim. Now, what is a maxim? A maxim is basically the intent behind a person's action. And when we look at actions, we have to determine if they're morally correct or not. And how do we determine if it's morally correct? Well, with Kantian moral theory, two things are being taken into consideration. First, a person cannot be used as a mere means. And this means they can't be involved in an action where they don't have an ability to choose. And that means an example of this would be acts of coercion, acts of violence, acts of deception. And the second thing that needs to be taken into consideration when deciding if an act is morally correct or not is that we have to make sure people are treated as ends in themselves. This means to treat people as autonomous beings, people who have the freedom to act upon their own maxims. Now that we have established what the Kantian moral theory is, we can use this to help reduce world hunger and poverty. Now, these people who are suffering, they're entitled to both justice and beneficence. Now, a common problem with people who are in this suffering is that they are vulnerable to people who are going to use them as mere means. To avoid this, when we are offering aid, we have to make sure it's a type of aid that's not going to take advantage of them. And often, when aid is being offered to these people, the people who are making the big decisions about this aid are the people who are offering the aid. And more often than not, the people who are receiving the aid are not given any decision at all in the matter. So it's important that when we are offering aid to those people who are suffering, that it's a type of aid that promotes their autonomy, that allows them a decision in the matter, whether they want to accept it or not, and whether it's best for them. So now that we have the Kantian moral theory, we can use this to help reduce world hunger and poverty. And it's important to know that the Kantian moral theory is not a list of actions, and it doesn't rank them and what is best and what is the best possible actions to take. That's not what it's for. It's a pattern of reasoning to help determine what is morally correct or not, and if it's just or beneficent. Now, to conclude, Honora Neal takes a step back and looks at utilitarian and the Kantian approach towards valuing human life. Now, with utilitarians, the way that they look at human life, it's important that to maximize happiness, that anything and everything should be sacrificed for it, including human life. It's not important as long as the greater good is achieved. Now, with the Kantian approach, human life is valuable, and it's valuable because people are autonomous. They have the ability to choose. They have the freedom to act. So when deciding upon what the best aid is for people and to help them from suffering world hunger, we should do something that promotes their autonomy. It's been about over 8 minutes since this video has started. Now let's look back at original statistics. Every year, 9 million people suffer and die from hunger and hunger-related diseases. That is equivalent of one person dying every 10 seconds. Since it's been 8 minutes, over 48 people have died since this video has started. Hunger and world poverty is a serious issue. Overall, world hunger and world poverty has been and will continue to be a problem unless something is done. Peter Singer argues that we are morally obligated to donate to aid agencies, that by doing so we can alleviate suffering and death. Honora Neal argues that even if we did donate to aid agencies, it doesn't mean our actions are justified. It doesn't make our action correct. That when we do offer aid to those people who are suffering, that it should be a form of aid that promotes their autonomy, that doesn't use them as mere means. Because if we force aid upon another person, it might seem good at first, but it could hurt them in the long run. There are many different ways to reduce world hunger and to end world poverty, but it's up to you now to decide